Hi guys, this is Brittany from By Brittany Goldwyn. I post videos about plants and projects, and today we are talking about how to start your own victory garden. Now, if you do not know what a victory garden is, don't worry, you're in good company because I did not know what a victory garden was yesterday. My husband, who edits my videos and who's very familiar with all of my content and my gardening, suggested that I make a video on this because he's seeing a lot of people talk about victory gardens, what they are, how to start one, and he thought it would be a good thing for me to talk about. So here I am talking about victory gardens. So what is a victory garden? Essentially, a victory garden is the term for a garden in your home, your backyard. And this was a term used during the World War II era from the government to encourage people to grow their own food, either to help supplement the limited food supply during wartime or to have the health benefits, the mental health benefits, the morale benefits that gardening and working in the soil can bring. And I'm a huge fan of both of those things. It's why I garden. I love plants for the boost in my mood, my overall morale, and I also love growing things for my family to eat. So that in a nutshell is what a victory garden is. Now, why people are searching for that right now, if you've turned on the news, you probably know that there are a lot of concerns around food supply, food safety, all of those things. I am always a fan of growing your own food if you can and if you want to and if you think you'll benefit from it. So we're going to start off talking about some things that you can grow in your victory garden and how to get started. Now, to me, a victory garden is really just a beginner gardening guide. If you're looking up how to grow a victory garden, it's probably because you want to start your own first garden. So a lot of the things that I'll be sharing today are just my general tips for anyone who wants to start their own garden. My first piece of advice is grow things that you or your family or your friends or whoever you're going to be sharing food with, grow things that you like to eat. So I don't grow certain things that I don't like to eat or that I think are really difficult to eat because I know it's just not going to be worth it. Like, I'm going to grow a bunch of jalapenos, and if I only use like 1 or 2 jalapenos every month, it's not super helpful for me to grow a ton of jalapenos. That's why I like growing things like cucumbers, tomatoes, greens, and stuff like that. So take the advice that I give you about what to grow in your victory garden with a grain of salt and think about what you have space for and what you will actually want to put the work into harvesting and eating. So we're in Maryland Zone 7A, and that means that mid-March right now we are still very much in winter, but we are starting to see the signs of very early spring. And that means slightly longer days and slightly warmer temperatures, but it's still very cool. A lot of people think that you can't be gardening right now, but you definitely can. I will show you what my garden looks like right now. Here's what I have currently growing and that I'm able to harvest from. I have spinach, which is definitely something I recommend as a beginner vegetable. Spinach grows in, honestly, astonishingly low temperatures. My mom's spinach in her garden even survived the winter. She planted it in the fall, left it in over the winter, and we have been picking it all winter under snow and ice, and it's still fine. I seeded this spinach last fall and let it stay in all winter, and you can see it is really taking off with growth now. So since it's only about 45 degrees outside, this is something that you can start the season off with and get a really great harvest either for salads or to cook it up in a soup or just a spinach saute. Now, even though it very much is still cold in winter here, I don't cover my spinach. However, I do cover my lettuce. So lettuce is a little bit more sensitive to the cold temperatures and frost and shorter days than spinach is going to be. So what I do to grow lettuce is use these hoop houses, which are essentially just these little hoopy things that you connect together and then you put either a frost cloth or plastic on top of them. Now, I did have a piece of plastic over these throughout most of the winter. I have taken that off now since it's no longer getting down into the low 20s and super cold temperatures. And now I just have the frost cloth on. Now, what this frost cloth allows me to do is start my seeds a little bit earlier than I would if they were just completely exposed in our climate. And that means that you can start producing food a little bit earlier than you would if you were just planting in the ground or a raised bed with no protection. I'll give you guys a look here at what's growing in my other covered bed. Now, these are just plain old raised beds. You can do this sort of a concept in any sort of garden. It can be in the ground, it can be at a raised bed, it can even be in containers that you put underneath of an apparatus like this. As you can see here, I've got fava beans, some more spinach, a ton of leeks sprouting up here, and then a bunch of lettuce running up and down the sides. I think I even have some Swiss chard in here. And then behind that, I've also got a cold frame, which is a very similar concept, except for this one I made out of PVC pipe, and I have a piece of 6 mil plastic covering it, and this helps to keep the soil temperatures a little bit higher and help with germination inside of the cold frame. And for this cold frame, I have some fava beans planted in there. I'm not super big on the taste of fava beans, but they're really good for the soil, replenishing the nitrogen in the soil that becomes depleted with other crops. And then I will eat them because I eat everything that I grow. And then I have lettuce and chard in there. And another reason that I recommend things like spinach and lettuce and chard and all those sorts of cooler weather greens is because they are super easy to direct seed in your garden. So a lot of plants you see behind me, I'm starting seedlings for lots of different things for the spring, and a lot of things you do need to start seeds for. But if you're a beginner, starting seeds can be a little bit overwhelming. You may not want to invest in all the different things you need. We'll touch on some of that in a minute. So anything that you can direct sow, which just means planting that seed directly in your soil and get a good harvest, is a really great idea for beginners because you don't have to deal with anything else other than the place you're planting and the seed. Now, there are certainly other cooler weather crops that you can experiment with: radishes, beets, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage. Things like that are awesome for cooler temperatures. However, I like to weigh the pros and cons of the money I'm saving growing things, what we eat, and the freshness at the store. And I do think that the freshness of greens, spinach, mustards, all sorts of stuff like that is kind of hit or miss at our stores, at least. So growing it is going to give you a fresh supply at home, so you don't have to spend a lot of money on things that may have been in transit for a ton of time and are already slimy by the time you're buying them. Now, once the weather starts warming up a little bit, we can move on from the greens. Those will start to turn bitter. You won't be able to grow them as well in the summer. And look at a couple other crops that do really, really well during that more traditional gardening season. Now, I see a lot of people recommend potatoes as a good thing for beginners to grow, and I certainly do think potatoes are a really good thing for beginners to grow. However, I'd like to spotlight sweet potatoes here. Now, if you don't like sweet potatoes, I didn't like sweet potatoes either before I started growing them, but after I started growing them, I convinced myself to like them, and now I love them. Once I saw how easy they were to grow and how prolific they were, even in a brand new in-ground bed that we put in and hadn't really conditioned the soil at all here in Maryland Zone 7, which has super clay, rocky soil, I was sold on adding sweet potatoes as a staple to my garden. I did a whole video on how to harvest and cure sweet potatoes last year, and I will also be doing a video on starting slips this year before we head out of the greenhouse. I'll give you guys a little peek at that. I'm just using 2 of our sweet potatoes from the harvest this year, and I keep them lightly moist here in the greenhouse on a seedling mat on a little layer of soil to sprout my own sweet potato slips. Now, these sweet potatoes I actually got from my cousin, who has been using them every year to sprout his own type of sweet potato. So I am confident that they will do well again next year. So last year we decided to convert a roughly 15 by 15 area of our yard to an in-ground garden bed. So that's a look right here. There are 3 rows for growing, and we primarily did this as a way to grow asparagus in the other 2 rows, which is a longer term crop. You do not get the payoff with asparagus as quickly as you do with some other things. It can take a couple years to actually get a good harvest of asparagus. So we decided to put those 2 in the ground here, and we had the 3rd row that we didn't know what to do with. So we planted sweet potato slips in here, and they took over. And another reason why sweet potatoes are a really great thing to grow if you're looking at actually having like a sustainable food supply is because they are shelf stable without really doing anything to them. So you don't have to dry them or freeze them or preserve them in any way. All you have to do is cure them after you dig them up, which is not an involved process. It doesn't involve anything crazy. It's just ensuring that they get about a week or 2 of high temperature, high humidity conditions in order to really bring out that sweetness in sweet potatoes. after that, they can just be stored in a box or a bag in your basement, and it is March and we are still eating through the sweet potatoes that we grew last year. So that's one reason that they're really great. They're shelf stable over the winter, but their foliage is also edible. Now, you may not really like the taste of it, but it is an edible green that you can have in the summer when other things like lettuces and spinaches may not be growing as prolifically, because again, those are cooler weather crops. And while traditional potatoes are a cooler weather crop, sweet potatoes are actually a tropical plant, so they thrive all summer, even here in Maryland Zone 7, as temperatures are soaring, as we have serious drought conditions sometimes, and as the days are long and sometimes brutal with the sun. So sweet potatoes, if you don't like them now, start to like them. It will be worth it. And the last thing I would recommend that you consider for your garden is something in the nightshade family that you eat a lot of. So generally, I would recommend a tomato of any kind, a pepper of any kind, or an eggplant of any kind. And I recommend these because they're pretty easy to grow. They're not super vulnerable to pests like something like a squash or a zucchini would be. I struggle a lot with squash and zucchini in my area because squash bugs are the worst. But I have a lot of luck with tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. So I grow a lot of those. Now, I would probably recommend you choose a tomato because they are the most versatile. You can preserve eggplant. I made a bunch of soups last fall with a bunch of the eggplant that we had, pureed them and froze them, and we've been eating them all winter. But tomatoes are super versatile and that you can blanch them and chop them up and freeze them and use them for a variety of things. Or you can just eat them fresh, which we do all the time too. Now, I tend to do a cherry tomato and a Roma tomato. The Roma tomatoes are really good for eating, but they're also super good for preserving, either through canning or freezing. And then we just eat a ton of the cherry tomatoes. And it's one of the only vegetables that my 7-year-old will eat, so I grow a lot of cherry tomatoes. And there are honestly days in the summer where I find myself eating just a giant bowl of cherry tomatoes and cucumbers for lunch because I have so many of them, I don't know what to do with them. And if you choose to grow something like a tomato that's going to need more of a trellis than something like a pepper or an eggplant might, I recommend doing something like this arch trellis here. I use this arch trellis, which is just a cattle panel zip tied to 2 fence posts. I use this to grow sugar snap peas in the early spring, and then I pop green bean seeds in to grow up here, lima bean seeds, and then I've also put tomato plants in this bed here, and they will naturally just grab onto and climb this trellis. I've also used these these A-frame trellises over here for tomatoes last year. Now these are a little bit shorter, so they're better for determinate tomato varieties, which essentially means there is a determined size, a determined maximum size for your tomato plant. I grow determinate Roma tomatoes. I get a ton of tomatoes from them, so I don't buy that like determinate tomato plants are going to give you less crop than an indeterminate variety will. I think it really just depends on your space and the type of tomato you're growing. Now, I do grow indeterminate varieties for my cherry tomatoes because I want them to get like 10 feet tall. So last year they way outgrew the trellis that I had. So this year I'm over here curing some pieces of bamboo with a propane torch. You can see the green ones here I haven't done yet, and the brown ones I've already cured to make them a little bit more resistant to the elements. And then I'm going to put them in the ground and attach one of these wire panels vertically in probably the middle beds here that I have the hoop houses on now, and just let the tomatoes grow as high as they want. And I don't care if I need to get out a step stool to pick my tomatoes. If I can grow them up, that makes more space for me to grow things in the bed underneath of them, especially companion plants that will help keep the bad bugs away from my tomato plants. And they can be things that you want to grow and eat too, like basil or other herbs. So if you stumbled on this video because you were looking for more information about victory gardens and starting your own in your backyard, I hope you found this video helpful. I'm a huge advocate of gardening and getting started and removing obstacles for everyone to become a grower, to get fulfillment out of their own gardens, growing food for themselves, getting in the dirt, and having something that they are proud of. So if you have any questions about starting your garden, definitely subscribe. I do tons of beginner gardening content, tons of content with me just meandering around my yard to give you guys inspiration on what I'm doing here in Maryland Zone 7A. So until next time, happy planting.